it's Vicky, and today I am here to share my February reading wrap-up with you guys. In February, despite it being the shortest month of the year, I read 8 things and had 1 DNF, so let's jump right in. So first, let's go ahead and get the DNF out of the way. This one was a little bit of a disappointment to me because it was the pick for the Random Reads book club, which is a book club that I run with Bobby over at Bobby Reads, and I DNF'd the book. So I feel kind of like a bad book club host, but I just was not interested in this book, and that is The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. I made it through part 1, which was about 130 pages, and I just was not into the story at all. I wasn't feeling the story, I wasn't into the characters. I tried listening to it on audio, I tried reading it while listening to the audiobook, and just nothing was working. So I thought, you know what, that's a sign that this book just isn't for me, so I DNF'd it. So I apologize to all of you out there who joined us for Random Reads this month, and yeah, I bowed out pretty early, so I apologize, but I just could not read the book, so there it is. So the first book that I completed in February was a YA graphic novel that was kind of an anticipated read for me that came out in 2021, and that is Who Da F Are You by Huda Fahmy. And this one I was interested in because it centers around a young girl named Huda who moves from, I can't remember where she moves from, but she moves to Dearborn, Michigan, and her family is Muslim, and she kind of throughout the graphic novel is trying to kind of figure out kind of who she is and like where she fits in like her high school, because in her old school she was the only Muslim girl really in her class, that she wore a hijab, and so that was kind of her identity, was like, oh, she's the Muslim girl. But then she moved to Dearborn and there is a lot more, or are a lot more Muslim kids in her school. So she couldn't really like use that as her identifier or whatever. So she's kind of trying to fit into different social groups and things like that. And so it was interesting in that sense because it had a coming of age element to it that I enjoyed. I liked the themes that it touched on because it touched on, like I said, like self-identity, friendships and things, and also touched on Islamophobia because she does experience that in her school. And so that part of it was interesting, but I think as a whole, I struggled a little bit with the actual book itself in terms of the art style. I'm not sure I was like totally loving the art style, and I wish that there was more to the story. I wish that there were more panels, hence more story to this, because there were so many pages that were just one big illustration instead of having like the little panels. So there wasn't as much story as I had hoped there would be, and I just kind of wanted more out of it. So I think I would read her other stuff because she does have another one that came out before this. I can't remember what it's called, but it does sound interesting. But for this one, it was okay. I liked it. It was a 3-star read. So my next read in February was one that I started in January on audio, and it ended up being my favorite read of the month, and that is The Storyteller by Dave Grohl. This is Dave Grohl's memoir just about his life in music. And if you guys don't know, Dave Grohl is the lead singer for Foo Fighters and also was the drummer for Nirvana. So it was just such a joy to listen to this audiobook because you could just tell how much Dave Grohl just loves music. He just lives and breathes it, and it just is such a huge part of his life, and just his passion for it just, to me, just jumped off the page and just made it just so interesting. And it was also very inspiring because I did not know this about him, but he is basically a self-taught musician. He took 1 drum lesson when he was a kid and otherwise taught himself to play the drums by banging on pillows in his bedroom, which to me is just like amazing. And yeah, he was just, it was very funny. It was just, he was so humble and just seems like such a cool guy. I just loved it. I also liked that it was not told in a linear way. He kind of jumps around in time, which kind of made it interesting. And then of course, after listening to this, and even while I was listening to the audiobook, I just got on a major Foo Fighters Nirvana kick. And now I've kind of been on a 90s, just in general, 90s rock binge ever since. Like, I'm just totally in the 90s jams right now. So yeah, if you feel like you want to, let me know down below what your favorite Foo Fighters song is, or Nirvana song, just because I think that would be fun. For me, with Nirvana, I have to say that of their albums, the one I listened to the most, even as a kid, and the one that I had it on a cassette tape, I know I'm totally aging myself here, had it on a cassette tape, and when I got my first CD player in 6th grade, I bought that one on CD because I'm like, I have to have that one. And that one is Unplugged in New York. I don't know why, but you would think that like the other albums would be more prominent, but really that one was the one I listened to the most. But my favorite song, I've always loved About a Girl. I've always liked that one. I love Polly. Yeah. It changes. And then as far as Foo Fighters goes, I really like, I don't own any Foo Fighters albums, which I know is like so bad, right? To be a 90s rock fan and not own a Foo Fighters album, but I've always really liked I'll Stick Around, which is like an early Foo Fighters song, just because, I don't know, I just love the guitar riff in it and everything. And then of course, like, Everlong is one of those, to me, is one of the best 90s rock songs ever. For me, it's one of those songs, like, anytime it comes on the radio, I keep it on and I gotta listen to it because I just love it. It's a great song. So I would probably say those. So yeah, I loved this book, and it's no surprise that I gave it 5 stars. Next up is a book that Leia and I had been reading together for a while, and it is the 5th book in a series, so I can't really say a whole lot about the plot and stuff, but we read the 5th book in the Warriors series. This is the first series because there's a ton of them. This one is the Prophecies Begin, and the 5th book, which we completed, is called A Dangerous Path. And so this series, I think I've mentioned before, is about a group of feral cats that live in this forest sort of area, and they have their own little territories that they guard and everything, and they have this kind of social hierarchy where they have like a clan leader and a deputy, and then there's like warriors who basically are like, you know, I guess the clan's like military, help defend their area and all that kind of stuff. And it just follows a cat who starts out as a what they call kitty pet. He was a domestic cat who went out to live in the forest and become a feral cat, and his journey into becoming a warrior in his clan. And so yeah, this is a really fun series. Leia loves it, and we actually already started the 6th book because the way this one ended, we just had to keep going right away. But I ended up giving this one 3 stars because I felt like it wasn't as strong as the last couple of books in the series, and I just felt like this plot in here dragged a little bit. There was this kind of element of the plot that I wanted more of, that was that like you kind of got teased about in the beginning, but it didn't really, it wasn't as prominent as I had hoped. And then some of the dramas with some of the characters in here were kind of starting to get annoying, honestly. But like I said, the way that this ended, it had a pretty good ending. Like I said, one that made us like immediately want to pick up the 6th book. So yeah, this was 3 stars. It was enjoyable. I recommend this series if it interests you at all. The next one I completed in February is one I'm not going to talk about because I already reviewed it in my 5-star prediction wrap-up that I just posted, and that is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Basically, I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. It was great. But if you want to see my deep thoughts on it, go check out that video. Another one that I completed in February that I'm not going to talk about here because I already talked about it in a vlog is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This one I did a whole vlog about it because I was doing a vlog where I was looking at the book that had been on my Goodreads TBR the longest, and this one was the one. I had put it on my Goodreads TBR back in 2012 when I first joined Goodreads, and so I read it, and it was good. I gave it 4 stars, but if you want my like full review of it, go check out that reading vlog. The next book that I completed in February was a poetry collection. Yay! I've been wanting to read more poetry, and I did. Well, I'm on the right track with having read one so far this year, and that is I Am the Rage by Dr. Martina McGowan, and this is a poetry collection basically about the Black experience in America. And so right off the bat, I mean, even with the title, you kind of know going in that this is going to be a emotionally charged collection, and it definitely was. You could really feel the just like raw emotion coming off of the page in these poems. She talks a lot about various topics, obviously racism, colonialism. She talks about Black Lives Matter. She talks about law enforcement, all the things. And there is one in particular that jumped out at me that I liked. I marked a couple that I really liked. But she did a whole poem about Breonna Taylor that was really good. Overall, this was a good collection. It definitely gives you a sense of what it's like to be Black in this country. And it was well done. However, the style of these poems, I wasn't 100% feeling. They're very, very straightforward and simple language, which is good sometimes, but I kind of wanted more, I don't know, I kind of wanted more of that like imagery, more sort of like metaphor, or, you know, I don't know, I guess I wanted it to be a little more flowery. I guess that's I don't even know if that's the right word, but I just kind of wanted more out of the actual language and the actual poems. Because like I said, though you got the emotion behind them, I just wanted more out of the actual words, if that makes any sense. So yeah, this was good. I recommend it if it sounds interesting to you. And I gave it 3 stars. The next book that I completed in the month of February was a buddy read that I did with one of my subscribers, Jamie. And I'm really glad that we did this buddy read together, because this was a pretty good book to have to kind of just discuss. And that is This Tenderland by William Kent Kruger. This is a historical fiction that takes place in the 1930s, like right when the Great Depression was going on. And it takes place in mostly like the Midwest, Minnesota, down, and then they kind of on their travels head into Missouri. It's about a young orphan named Odie and his brother Albert are living in this at this residential school in Minnesota, and they're the only 2 white kids there. Everyone else is Native American, and so it's about the 2 of them and their friend Mose, who basically something goes down because time at the school is not great. The people there, the woman that runs it and her husband are cruel, and something happens that causes them to run away. And they get in a canoe and they're traveling down this river, and it's sort of just about them they're traveling, like I said, from the school in Minnesota heading towards St. Louis. And have lots of stops and meet lots of different people along the way. So this had a bit of a slow start for me. It took me probably 75, maybe 100 pages to get into it. But once I did get into it, it did end up being a really good story. It had a lot of good coming of age elements, which you guys know, I love a coming of age story, and this definitely had that, because along the way, Odie, I believe, is 12 in this book, and he is finding out things about himself and his family, and just sort of learning about the world on his travels, and so I really liked that element. There were also some pretty good characters in here. Like I said, along the way they meet a lot of different people, and some of them are pretty interesting, which made for an interesting story. And then in terms of the historical element, I really liked how he showed what it was kind of like to live during the Great Depression, because along the way they meet a lot of people that are struggling because of the Depression. And it was tough. It was tough. And I think that this book showed that very well. It also did a pretty good job of shedding some light on how horrible residential schools are. Something, again, that in American history, at least, you don't really hear anything about. And so it was nice to read a book that touched on that and showed just how completely awful it was that these kids were taken from their families, being forced to, you know, assimilate into a white culture. They weren't allowed to speak their native language. They weren't allowed to wear, you know, the clothing that they, you know, were used to wearing. They were forced to learn about Christianity and just all of that kind of stuff. It was just horrible. And so this book did a good job of showing that too. So yeah, overall, this was a nice adventure story. It definitely had heavy moments, heavy topics. Not surprising considering you're talking about residential schools, you're talking about the Great Depression, you're talking about orphans. So it had some heavy topics, but I think that all in all it was like a good kind of adventure story, and I really enjoyed it. So I ended up, by the end, giving it 4 stars because it grew on me over time. At first, I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about it, but by the end, I thought it was a really good book, and yeah, I gave it 4 stars. Okay, and then last but not least, I read the book that was the February pick for the Literally Dead book club over on Goodreads, and this month it was Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby, and so I decided to pick it up. I just got this book for Christmas, and when I saw that this was the pick, I was like, you know what, I might as well read it now, why not? So this one is about 2 men, Ike and Buddy Lee, and their 2 sons were gay, were married. Ike's son Isaiah was black and Buddy Lee's son Derek is white. And basically these 2 guys, these men, were not supportive of their sons in their relationships and in their homosexuality in general. And their 2 sons, though, are murdered. And they take it upon themselves to figure out what happened to their sons and get revenge on whoever did it. And this was, if you're looking at it as a revenge story, it was pretty good. It was a good revenge story. It was a lot more graphically violent than I was expecting. There was a couple of scenes in here that I was just like, oh my gosh, like, ugh. Like I had to like put the book down. There was a couple of chapters that I read that after reading them, I had to put the book down for a little bit because I was like, that was a lot. So it does kind of play out like an action movie in that sense. There is a lot of like fighting and just like tough stuff. To the point that sometimes it came across as a little bit cheesy, like how action movies sometimes are. It kind of did that a little bit for me sometimes. But I did really like the kind of back and forth and the kind of like banter and the overall just sort of like relationship between Ike and Buddy Lee, because at the beginning of the story, they really have nothing in common with each other than their sons. But as they're kind of going through this revenge plot, they become friends, and it was kind of just cool to see them interact together. Buddy Lee especially, I thought he was pretty funny. A lot of time you can tell he was kind of there for comic relief. Because otherwise this was a pretty dark, heavy story, and he kind of lightened the mood up sometimes. And then also kind of going back to the whole like action movie sort of comparison, it was a pretty predictable plot, and it did sometimes make me a little bit like, when like every time they would go to talk to somebody or go to like find out something, like get some sort of information regarding this revenge, it just like they just got it, like people would just tell them what they want to know, or like they would just find the person they were looking for. And so sometimes it kind of came across as a little bit convenient. And then also the pacing was a little weird. It took me a really long time to get through the first half of this book. I don't know why, because I did like it. It just, the pacing was slow. But the last half, especially the last 100 pages or so, I was like, wow, I couldn't put it down. So yeah, overall, I was pretty entertained by this. I thought that it was good, even though, like I said, it was really gritty. And it does deal with heavy topics because you're dealing with 2 guys. Our main characters are basically homophobic guys, and it deals with obviously racism. There's a lot of conversations that Ike and Buddy Lee have on their little adventure, if you want to call it that, where they talk about that. And so it does touch on those issues well. But I think I just overall, I was gonna give this 4 stars initially, but I decided to ultimately give it 3, because even though I liked the themes, I liked the grit, I was entertained, I also felt like there were some issues with the plot just being really predictable and sometimes kind of cheesy and stuff like that. So overall it was a 3-star read, but I think if it interests you at all and you love, like, if you love like action movies, especially where it's like 2 dudes team up to go do something, like, I think you would like this. So yeah, overall 3 stars, not a bad read. Didn't love it, didn't hate it. It was good. Alright guys, so that's what I read in the month of February. It was a pretty interesting month. Let me know down below what you read in February because I would love to hear about it. And yeah, that's it. So I hope you guys are having a wonderful month and I will talk with you soon. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.